In the year 1518, a small German city became the host of an unexplainable phenomenon. No one knew why hundreds of otherwise ordinary people took to the streets, compelled by an unseen force to dance, to spin, to leap, to sway in a frenzy that defied their will and ravaged their bodies. They danced until they died. And although the event baffled and broke the city, it has echoed through the centuries, inspiring everything from paintings to poems to modern songs. Today, we're going to tell you about it. This is the story of Strasbourg in the year 1518. A city much like any other, nestled in the heart of Europe, where life moved to the steady beat of tradition. Here, the rhythms were set by church bells and the rising sun. The greatest fears were floods, famines, and mysterious illnesses that struck down children in the night. But all of that changed in a single instant. It began in silence. There was no announcement, no trumpet in the streets, no omen painted across the sky. Just the sun, already high and oppressive, beating down upon the cobblestones of Strasbourg in July of 1518. Something in the very air had shifted, though the people did not yet know it. The story begins with her. She was the first, a woman known only as Frau Trophia, a name half lost to time, half remembered in dread. She stepped from her house on a morning like any other, the hem of her dress brushing the ground, her eyes heavy from sleeplessness or some darker unrest. She did not speak. She did not scream. She simply began to move. At first, no one noticed a step, a sway, a slight twist of the wrist, the kind of idle motion that might be mistaken for habit or daydream. But it did not stop. Her feet tapped the stones rhythmically. Her arms floated upward, as if pulled by invisible strings. Her breathing grew shallow and rapid, yet her eyes remained distant, fixed on something no one else could see. She was dancing, but not with joy, not in celebration, not even in madness. It was as if her body had been claimed, puppeteered by something beyond flesh. And soon she was not alone. In 1518, something strange gripped the city of Strasbourg. To this day, no one can agree on what they were witnessing. Was it a sickness of the blood? A natural response to heat, stress, and poor diet? Was it an astrological curse, a new moon or Mercury in retrograde? Or was it the devil's own dancing plague? What began as isolated fits quickly spread. Whole families were afflicted, then entire blocks. Soon, the streets belonged to the dancers. Physicians insisted it was a sickness of the blood, a natural response to the oppressive summer, to malnutrition, to despair. They pointed to ancient texts describing hysteria and melancholia turned violent. But their remedies, herbs, bleeding, purges, did nothing. Prayers brought no calm. The afflicted remained caught in an invisible current that pulled them deeper into exhaustion, and for many, into death. The clergy, torn between faith and terror, shifted their approach. Some denounced the dancers as sinners, accusing them of weakness, heresy, or demonic indulgence. Others offered compassion and shelter, only to find their chapels filled with twitching bodies. Relics were brought from distant abbeys, carried through streets that reeked of sweat and incense. Monks knelt in the dirt to pray, their voices trembling as dancers spun past them, eyes wide and empty. The rituals offered no peace. The relics grew cold. The prayers fell flat. Beyond Strasbourg, rumors began to spread along rivers and trade roads. Tales of a cursed city, of people moving without will or rest. Travelers avoided its gates. Pilgrims chose other paths. Nearby villagers sent word to their churches, asking if such a fate could befall them too. Was it punishment for pride? For indulgence? For forgotten vows? Among the people, explanations grew like weeds. Some said the devil was testing their faith. Others whispered of witches, of charms buried beneath the city. A few spoke of something older, forces predating Christ, bound to the land itself. They told stories of spirits that once danced in the forests, of rites performed in secret clearings, of blood spilled to appease things no longer named. Perhaps, they said, Strasbourg had built its churches atop sacred ground, and now the ground had woken. As the summer wore on, the dancers grew more desperate. They no longer resembled people. Their pale, drawn skin hung loosely from limbs that jerked with a violent rhythm. Their eyes were glassy. Some screamed without end. Others laughed until their voices broke. A few sang strange, dissonant melodies. Mothers danced away from their children. Sons collapsed in front of their fathers. No one was spared. Efforts to contain the phenomenon failed. The square could no longer hold them all. Streets became rivers of motion. Windows rattled with the pounding of feet. At night, the city did not sleep. The beat of dancing echoed through the walls, seeping into dreams. The healthy began to tremble. Some sealed their homes with ash and prayer. Others fled. The city council, once confident in its authority, began to unravel. Meetings grew tense and erratic. Scrolls and reports were filled with frantic scribbles. One scribe was said to have copied a list of names, added his own, and then danced until his legs gave out. Another broke into the cathedral and danced down the central aisle beneath stained glass saints. Leadership had become meaningless. And somewhere deep in the city, Frau Trophia disappeared. No one knows what became of her. Some say she died, bones broken, breathless. Others claim she wandered into the woods, dancing still. A few insist she never existed at all, that she was a specter, a symbol, a spirit conjured by the collective madness of a people frayed to the edge. Whatever the truth, her name faded, swallowed by the larger story. By August, a grim pattern emerged. The fever would sometimes break, the dancers slowing, sagging, collapsing in exhaustion. Some crawled into alleys and wept. Others never rose again. But then, as if cued by an unseen conductor, the frenzy would begin again. A soundless music pulsing beneath the city. A hum felt in the bones. No one played. No one sang. But the rhythm always returned. And so Strasbourg waited. Not for salvation, not for answers, but for the next step, the next fall, the next blank face to begin to move. They came to call it the plague, a sickness that turned people into dancers. Yet some believed it was not entirely without logic. That behind the chaos, there was a terrible kind of order, a pattern hidden in the madness. Witnesses began to take note of when the afflicted would begin to move. Some always at dawn, others only beneath the full moon. A few danced only in groups, as if some collective presence was needed to ignite the fire inside them. But this was no celebration. The dancers themselves never called it dancing. There were no smiles, no partners, no music. Their eyes remained unfocused. Their hands trembled. Some collapsed and died where they stood. Others survived but never spoke again. Their bodies were carried away in silence, wrapped in linen, buried in unmarked graves. A few began again weeks later, as if the rhythm had only paused. This was not dancing, it was something darker. A compulsion, a seizure of motion, a force that took the body as its instrument and played it into ruin. And still they danced. As the affliction grew, so too did the city's silence. Strasbourg, once filled with the ordinary sounds of carts over stone, merchants haggling in the square, children laughing and bells marking the hours, grew unnervingly quiet. Some believed the plague was a punishment, not from God, but from the land itself. That the soil had become angry, that ancient pacts had been broken. Others insisted the dancers were possessed, not metaphorically, but truly, vessels for something nameless that moved from person to person like a wind through the corridors of the soul. The noises that remained were unnatural. The shuffling of tired feet, the slap of flesh on cobblestones, the strained moans of exhausted dancers. Even the crows that circled above had gone silent, as if unwilling to call over a city sliding into madness. Inside their homes, people whispered behind locked shutters. Rumors passed like contraband. There was a city struck by a dancing plague, they said. The year before, there had been 365 cases. By the end of that year, the number had grown to 1,600. By the following spring, more than half the city was moving without rest. At first, it had been joyful, people skipping through the streets, twirling in the open air. But it soon turned sinister. Limbs trembled. Eyes rolled back. Skin grew pale and cold. Some bit through their own tongues. Others clawed at their chests. A few screamed in languages that had not been spoken for centuries. One woman danced until her feet were worn bare and bleeding. When she collapsed, the physician who had been recording her movements quietly shut his book and never opened it again. But still, people kept dancing until they dropped dead in the street. And still, the rhythm continued. No one could explain it. One monk began preaching that it was a miracle. When the authorities came for him, he vanished. And still the dance went on. He had gathered followers, performed strange midnight rituals. Those who danced sometimes survived, but they were never the same. The markets reopened. The bells rang. Children played again. But the survivors moved differently. They stared into empty spaces. They flinched at sudden noises. They could no longer work or play as before. They were hollow vessels moving through the world without their own will. And so the city moved on. Life returned to something resembling normal, but the people were more careful now. They moved through the world in silence. They watched the ground beneath their feet. And they never, ever danced again. The city had endured its dance. It was terrible, unstoppable. There were places in Strasbourg that no one entered for months afterward. A narrow alley near the fish market where 4 dancers had fallen dead within minutes of each other, their bodies twisted into grotesque shapes. A ruined cellar beneath the baker's shop where a group of the afflicted had locked themselves inside and danced in total darkness for days, until only 2 emerged, shivering and mute. A corner of the cathedral courtyard where so many candles had burned that wax had melted deep into the stones, their flames once flickering in time with something unsung. People walked different routes now. Shutters were closed earlier. Coins were left in corners without explanation. There were new rules, unwritten but obeyed. No one whistled in the streets. No one tapped a foot near others. No one spoke of music unless necessary. Something had shifted. The plague had been awound, and though it no longer bled, it had not healed. Its presence lingered, like heat after fire or scent after decay. And in some strange way, it became part of Strasbourg's identity, unspoken but felt. Like a scar across the back of the city, hidden beneath clothing, sensitive to the touch. In the years that followed, the memory of the plague did not disappear. Never that, but it dulled at the edges like a blade left to rust. New generations heard only fragments of the story. Children asked why certain alleys were avoided, why their grandparents frowned at dancing, why some districts had no musicians. The answers came not in warnings, but in quiet shifts of the voice, in glances exchanged, in sentences that trailed off before the truth could be named. They called it the summer the city forgot how to stand still. It entered folklore wrapped in half-truths and symbolism. Some painted it as a divine test. Others as a lesson in restraint. A few interpreted it as a metaphor for grief, guilt, or collective sorrow. But those who had been there knew better. They had felt the heat. They had felt the pulse beneath the stones. And they understood that something ancient had awakened, and had chosen their city as its stage. Centuries passed. Strasbourg changed. Stone gave way to brick. Torches to lanterns. Dirt roads to cobbled streets. The cathedral bells still rang, but fewer people looked up when they did. Once, a dancer came to perform in a theater near the city center. Her show was elegant, precise, modern. Yet after the performance, she wandered the streets in the evening, drawn by something she could not name. She wrote in her journal that she felt watched, not by eyes, but by something deeper. Like the city is listening, she wrote. Like it's waiting for me to take the wrong step. She never danced again. The world had grown louder, carriages, machinery, footsteps echoing in the narrow lanes. And yet in certain corners, silence still ruled. Some walked too quickly through the old quarter. Others hesitated when a street performer began to play. A few laughed it off, saying that rhythm could be a curse. Others did not laugh, because deep down they remembered what the city had once learned. That movement can be a language. And history does not always sleep quietly beneath our feet. Sometimes it taps just beyond hearing, in the shadow of the cathedral, near the river's bend, outside the old square. In pauses, in dreams. The records remain, court documents, medical notes, sermons, but few dwell on the emotional truth. Fewer still describe what it felt like to hear the beat of your own heart and wonder if it belonged to you anymore. And yet the dancers remain, in shadows, in stories. In some old families, traditions linger. Not written ones, but lived ones. Daughters were forbidden from walking barefoot on stone. Sons were warned never to mock illness. In some homes, music was banned on certain days without explanation. In one household, every child was taught the same phrase before bed. Still feet. Still breath. Still mind. No explanation, just repetition. The plague had taken so many that even the archives hold only scattered references to the summer of 1518. One priest in the 1800s recorded a strange confession. A man claimed he sometimes heard music beneath his floorboards. Not loud, just a soft, persistent hum. The tune remained even when he moved house. Eventually, he stopped walking at night, afraid his feet would begin to move without his will. Even today, there are stories, visitors who come to Strasbourg and feel a strange tension in their legs. What happened in 1518 was not the first time, and it would not be the last. Historians, digging through brittle parchment and forgotten chronicles, have found echoes elsewhere. Whispers of towns overtaken by strange movements, of villages seized by trances, of dancers who moved for days or weeks without rest. In Aachen, in Cologne, in Flanders. In the Alps. Always described differently. Always remembered the same. Dancing plagues, they called them. But the word plague is not quite right, because a plague can be understood. A plague has a pattern. What happened in Strasbourg had none of these. It had only rhythm. And it left behind a question that has never fully gone away. What if this is part of us? Not a sickness, but a possibility, a hidden code written into our blood and breath, waiting for the right conditions to awaken. What if the dancing was not madness, but instinct? Ancient, forgotten, like a language we once spoke before we knew how to write. Something in the body remembers the beat. And when the world grows too heavy, too full, too loud, or too silent, it surfaces. In the end, there were no answers. No monument to mark where the first foot fell. No song to capture the melody that never played. Children were born who would never know what their mothers had seen. But the silence never left. No God to claim credit. No devil to take the blame. Only the silence remained. It rolled over the city like fog, curling through the spaces left behind. Houses were repaired. Streets were cleaned. But the silence took residence, in the cracks between bricks, in the hollows of bells, in the stillness before a storm. And for those who had danced, those who had moved until their bodies broke, what remained was not memory but echo. They remembered the sweat. They remembered the footsteps that would not stop. Some forgot entirely, as if whatever had moved them had taken a part of their minds when it left. They did not speak of it. Not fully. Some could not. Other wars came. Other plagues. Other fires. Other famines. Life moved on. Strasbourg became modern, electric, connected. But the memory lived on, carried in the way people walked, in their stillness, in the way they looked at music, at shadows, or at their own trembling hands. And the world turned, as it always does. But somewhere beneath the asphalt and concrete, the old stones remain. And the stones remember. They remember the heat. And maybe, if you walk there quietly, alone, you'll feel it too, a subtle pressure in your spine, a twinge in your heel, a rhythm that doesn't come from your mind, but from your marrow. You'll pause, telling yourself it's nothing. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's the silence, asking if you remember. Maybe it's the first note, waiting to be heard. Maybe it's the rhythm, still alive beneath your feet.